In the minds of most Americans, the beaches of Utah and Omaha in Normandy in June 1944 are symbols of European liberation. Thousands of Allied troops stormed the shore fighting against the Nazi German military. What unfolded on those beaches seemed like a clear-cut confrontation between good and evil, between freedom and oppression. However, in the rubble and chaos of the battle, American units took a number of strangely unusual prisoners of war. These were men in Nazi German uniforms who spoke Russian or French or Polish, and most astonishingly who were of Asian descent. Specifically at Utah Beach, US paratroopers from the 101st Airborne captured 4 Asian-looking soldiers. When their identity was confirmed, it exposed one of the most complex, tragic, and least known stories of World War II: Korean soldiers captured in German uniforms at Normandy. This is a historical paradox so unbelievable it sounds like fiction. How did men born in Korea, an Asian country occupied by Japan, end up in a Nazi foxhole fighting to defend Fortress Europe against Americans from the other side of the globe? Their presence at Normandy is a living testament to the brutality, the absurdity, and the forced globalization of this war. The story of these Korean soldiers is not just a historical oddity. It is a chain of personal tragedies spanning 3 continents, 3 totalitarian regimes, and 3 different armies. They were not Nazi fanatics, they were victims swept up in the vortex of clashing empires. The core question is, where did their loyalty lie? Who were they fighting for? And how can a human being be stripped of their self-determination to the point where they are forced to fight for regimes they hated or didn't even know? This forgotten truth not only unveiled the Nazi desperation for manpower in 1944, but also revealed the network of POWs and forced conscripts from occupied nations who were used as cannon fodder on the most dangerous fronts. These Korean soldiers were not German. They were the residue of much larger global conflicts. Today, we are reopening the files to find the truth, what really happened. The story of the Korean soldiers captured at Normandy is a harrowing journey of coercion and chance beginning in Asia in the 1930s. Their historical background is more complicated than perhaps any other single military unit on the battlefield. Korea at that time was under the harsh rule of the Japanese Empire. Young Korean men were often forcibly conscripted into the Imperial Japanese Army, IJ. Some of the Korean soldiers captured at Normandy likely began their military lives this way, pushed into Japan's invasion campaigns in Manchuria or China. Their first battlefield was in Asia. After serving in the Japanese army, these men were captured as POWs by the Soviet Red Army during the Sino-Japanese border. Conflicts such as the Battle of Khalkhin-Gol in 1939. The Soviets captured a large number of Japanese and Korean prisoners. Instead of being released or repatriated, they were funneled into the infamous Soviet labor camps, the gulags. When Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, the war on the Eastern Front became a meat grinder. The Red Army needed every man they could get, but they also lost millions of soldiers to the Wehrmacht. Among those captured by the Germans were the Korean gulag prisoners. This was the moment their fate changed for the second time. Nazi Germany, especially after the disaster at Stalingrad, was desperate for manpower for static defense and logistics roles. They began recruiting, or rather coercing, non-German POWs into units known as the Osttruppen, Eastern Troops. These units were mostly made up of Russians, Ukrainians and Poles, captured in battle, but they also included the Korean prisoners taken from Soviet captivity. For the trapped Korean soldier, the choice was brutal. Remaining in the German POW camp meant a slow death from starvation, disease and forced labor. Joining the German Osttruppen, while seen as a deep betrayal by some, offered a chance at survival, better food and warmer clothes. They weren't fighting for Hitler, they were fighting for existence. By 1944, the Nazis were using Osttruppen units to plug defensive gaps along the Atlantic Wall. They were often assigned to areas the German High Command considered less critical or most likely to be attacked, essentially serving as sacrificial frontline defense. That is why these Korean men ended up on a French beach. One of the most famous cases is that of Yang Kyung-jong. Though records are debated, Yang's story is considered emblematic of this tragedy. According to later testimony and records, Yang was first coerced into the Japanese army, then captured by the Red Army and forced to fight for the Soviets, and finally captured by the Germans at the Battle of Kharkov. He was given a German uniform and a rifle and shipped to France. Imagine the mindset of a Korean soldier who had never seen the Atlantic Ocean, now digging a foxhole in a concrete bunker in France, preparing to shoot at Americans he'd never heard of, all while wearing the uniform of his enemy's enemy's enemy. The sheer absurdity of the war for them was absolute. When they were captured at Normandy, the confusion of the American soldiers was understandable. They couldn't classify this kind of POW. The subsequent interrogations, filtering through various interpreters, German to Russian, Russian to English, unveiled their horrific and forced odyssey. These Korean men were not fanatics. They were individuals who had been stripped of their nationality and identity, shoved through the meat grinder of three brutal empires. Their presence at Normandy is a painful demonstration of the extent to which this global war devoured the fates of millions of voiceless people. After their capture, the Korean soldiers in German uniforms became subjects of intense interest for Allied intelligence. Interrogations revealed not only their unbelievable journey, but also critical intelligence about the morale and organization of the German Osttruppen units. Allied official histories often focus on the resistance of core German units. But the truth is that a significant portion of the Normandy Defense Force was made up of poor, unmotivated and poorly equipped conscripts. The existence of these Koreans was the clearest evidence of the Wehrmacht's desperation for manpower by 1944, when US troops first discovered and captured the Asian-looking individuals in German uniforms. The initial reaction was one of total bewilderment and disbelief. They were initially thought to be Japanese or members of some unique special unit. Only through interrogation did their stories of constant wandering and coercion emerge. For the Korean soldiers, capture was probably a form of liberation from a chain of continuous oppression. The price they paid, despite being victims of coercion, Osttruppen soldiers were often treated more harshly than regular German POWs. American and British troops were suspicious of their loyalty and kept them at arm's length. After interrogation, they were sent to POW camps in the UK or the US. In the case of Yang Kyong-jong, after being captured in France, he was transferred to a POW camp in the UK. He later decided not to return to Asia, fearing reprisal from both the Japanese and later the Soviets. Instead, Yang emigrated to the United States in 1947, living a quiet life in Illinois until his death in 1992, carrying the impossible secret of a life thrown between three hostile armies. The story of these Korean soldiers poses a deep question about loyalty and individual responsibility in a global war. Were they traitors for fighting under the banner of their oppressors? Or were they merely innocent victims, forced to choose between two brutal deaths? In the systems of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, the value of an individual life was virtually zero. These Korean men were used as easily disposable chess pieces. They represented the lowest rung of humanity, without rights, without a nation and without a choice. Their existence complicates the heroic narrative of the ideological showdown at Normandy, replacing it with a quiet story of endurance and desperation. Normandy wasn't just the site of the Third Reich's eventual defeat, it was a meeting point for human tragedies from all over the world. The story of the Korean soldiers in German uniform is a stark reminder that war is not just about major battles. It is about the individual fates crushed by immense global forces. Conclusion. The Korean soldiers captured at Normandy are living witnesses to the unimaginable complexity and sheer inhumanity of World War II. Their journey from Japanese coercion to Soviet forced labor to Nazi desperation turned them into stateless, nameless soldiers used as human material. Their appearance on the French coast paints a chilling picture of global war where the fate of a single individual can be tossed about by conflicts thousands of miles away. The story of Yang Kyong-jong and his compatriots is not just a rare military footnote, it is a philosophical question about freedom and choice. When does survival become an act of betrayal, and can the world ever fully grasp the price paid by these unknown individuals for the wars of empire? Follow the channel to keep uncovering the hidden files of history.